Hello, and welcome to Return to the Fire with Wild Women, the podcast that seeks to reignite wisdom aligned with the regeneration of people and the planet. I'm your host, Kim Carfor, founder of the 501c3 nonprofit Wild Women, and I'm so glad that you joined us today. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Return to the Fire with Wild Women. I'm Kim Carfor, your host, and today I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Nicole Dittmer. So, Dr. Nicole Dittmer is an academic from the United States who researches aspects of female monstrosity in both 19th century British literature and 17th century American history. Her interests also include the Gothic, penny publications, the environment and literature, medical humanities, horror literature and cinema, and photography. Her publications include Monstrous Women and Ecofeminism in the Victorian Gothic, a great chapter, right? That ugly which has raised
Oh,
the very devil. Is that a chapter?
that's a chapter,
Oh,
yes.
I love this title. Um, that ugly witch has raised the very devil, feral mothers, ecosemiotics, and witchy biologies in American dime novels. And another great title, Mistress of the Broomstick, Biology, Ecosemiotics, and Monstrous Women and Wizards, The Wild Witch of the Heath, which to me is so Return to the Fire because it connects the wild women archetype with the Return to the Fire and breaking those tropes together. So, welcome, Dr. Dittmer. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Kim. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we have so much in common. I'm so excited in our academic endeavors. I'm so excited to dive into it. So I just want to start off with the question,
Sure.
um, how did you get into this work? So you're bridging together literature, this wild women trope, ecofeminism, monstrosity, Gothic studies, but also nature. So uh, what's your origin story?
Okay,
Both.
so I hope you have some time because it does start a while back. So basically, my entire life, from the time I can remember, probably I was a preteen. I've always been interested in horror studies. I've always been interested in Gothic literature. Yes, I was that preteen girl who was fascinated with things like Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, for example. So all throughout my high school career, that's the type of literature I read. And if you asked my mother or my father where they would find me, I would be sitting somewhere outside reading a book. So I was a fan of being in nature and literature at the same time. As I got older, um, when I enrolled at the university, it was my bachelor's program. I was just starting off. I think it was my second semester. I saw that they were providing a Victorian studies class. So I was excited as soon as I saw the syllabus. Jane Eyre was on the syllabus, and yes, this is the class for me. Oh, I was wrong about that. Um, so the part about Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights that mostly fascinated me was the concept of the wild woman. In Jane Eyre, you have Bertha, Rochester's former current wife who resides in the supposed attic. And then you have Kathy from Wuthering Heights who succumbs to this madness after a separation with Heathcliff. So I was always just absolutely fascinated with the psychological perspective. Well, when I had taken this course at the university, one of our assignments was to write a research paper using a specific approach to these novels. So, needless to say, I wrote about the feminist and the psychological aspects of Jane Eyre, and I looked at predominantly Bertha Mason. I was very upset when I received my final grade for that paper because I am openly admit I am a self-proclaimed nerd. I put it this way, I always tried to shoot for the stars growing up. I made sure my grades were top notch. So when I received a C on my research paper, I was devastated. And I was informed by the professor at the time that psychology and feminism has no place in Jane Eyre.
Oh.
Blew my mind. Um, and yeah, and I was also the type of individual that if someone told me I was wrong about something and I disagreed with them, I would do everything within my power to prove them wrong.
Nice.
So for the rest of my educational career, I took a lot of psychology courses, which led to taking more biology and neurology courses. I invested in Victorian studies and Gothic studies, and I excelled. I did very well. I created my own theorems regarding that literature.
Oh.
And by the time I took my master's program, I was top of my class. And when I went in, I was accepted into an eco-criticism course, which was a higher level course. And they were select. So I was very honored and happy when I was taking this course. Well, it turns out the individual teaching this course was the same professor that I had from the Victorian class. And it when he was teaching eco-criticism, I actually he introduced us to Simon S. Talk, who started talking about ecophobia, and then in that class at the same time we read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Mm.
So I started going down that route and looking at ecophobia. Then I started doing my own independent research on eco-criticism. And then I came across ecofeminism. And when I was doing my research, I came across Clarissa Pinkola Estes,
Hmm.
her work, and the whole concept of the wild woman.
Yeah.
And that just sparked so many ideas that when I finished the master's program and when I finished the eco-criticism class, I already had an active outline in my head to propose to a PhD program where I was going to start looking at the wild woman and ecofeminism in the Victorian Gothic. And that's my origin. That's all how it all came about, was to prove somebody wrong, but then I found my own passion.
Yay! I love this story because part of the Wild Women to me is that kind of pushing the edge, pushing the boundary, being a little bit stubborn and steadfast. And so I always feel this way because when I teach, I appreciate the kind of inclusivity and diversity and helping students with disabilities. But sometimes I find, well, when someone gives you a no, then that gives you that kind of power to push through and be like, no, I'm going to
Yes.
show you wrong and get a PhD because I know there's something here. My
Yes,
intuition is screaming that there is something in
absolutely.
in feminist psychology. So good for you.
Thank
Um,
you.
I love that. I think it's really funny in terms of sometimes the other powers are kind of have a sense of humor, and so it's funny that you have the same professor.
Yeah, I found that to be a little peculiar. And it was funny because when I graduated with my degree, he came to the graduation ceremony and we took a picture together. And I said to him, because he knew I was a bit on the sarcastic side. So I said to him, I said, "So do I get that apology yet?"
What did he say?
Gave me a big hug and he congratulated me.
That's awesome.
And we followed up after I received my PhD as well. I went back to visit him and I told him, I said thank you
Wow.
for lighting
Yeah.
this fire.
Yeah.
So
It's the total fire. It's the passion fire because you always hear that when you get a PhD, you need that drive. And so I think that kind of created that fire. So
so it did come full circle. And you know what? I to this day, I do appreciate everything that he invested in me during that time period and by pushing me the way he pushed me. So I do have
nice.
gratitude.
Yeah, that's awesome. It reminds me of award ceremonies when people get up and they say, "This is for all the people who told me no." Like, thank you, finally, because I finally achieved it or made I did something. So I so appreciate you bringing up Clarissa Pinkola Estes because
Yes.
that definitely transformed me. And for anybody in the audience who has not heard of her work, so Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes has a fantastic book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. What is it? The Wild Women Archetype or
Hmm.
yeah. And so it's
Yep.
all about it's a Jungian analysis of feminist psychology or the psychology of women. And so all of these stories and myths that get left out of kind of mainstream psychology, so this depth narrative of these really helpful myths that have been buried that are kind of dark, right? They
Oh,
have,
yes.
and I once I read that book, I thought, wow, it's incredible because now I'm watching film And I'm like, why is there always resolution in film? Once you juxtapose it to this book like Clarissa Pinkola Estes, when the narrative doesn't always work out for the character, for the woman
Hmm.
protagonist. And so, do you want to say a little bit more about that book and how that kind of shifted your perspective or helped you formulate? Would you call it a feminist psychology or a psychology of the feminine or women, or how would you articulate that?
Well, regarding her work, first and foremost, what enticed me about her work is that she addressed the wild woman archetype. The
Yeah.
second thing that grabbed me is a lot of the myths or the stories that she focused on in that book were oral storytelling. So they weren't available in written form. So it was just basically her retelling of the stories as they were told to her.
Oh.
And when she went into and she called them cantajados, which was the song of the people, and just her descriptions of these women and the absolute strength that they had in their current situations. And yet, and 9 times out of 10, a lot of these women in her myths, in her stories, they didn't prevail, but they showed such strength, they showed such character and endurance. And that's really what drew me to her work. And I don't know the name of her other book that I just finished. But it talks about the mythology of the mother.
Hmm.
And starts looking at mother figures. And while it's not necessarily the wild woman archetype, it talks about the strong woman as the mother figure.
Hmm.
And I found that to be just inspiring as well. And when I actually completed Dr. Estes's work, that's how I got into Stacey Alamo's work too, when we started talking about the undomesticated spaces for women. And I felt that they worked hand in hand with one another of the concept of the wild part of non-human nature and the wild woman itself.
Right. So was that her Untie the Strong Woman, or was it a
Mm,
different one that you're thinking
that
about?
was it. Untie the
Okay.
Strong Woman. Thank you. I couldn't think of the name. My bookshelf's right there, but I can't turn around and
Probably
look.
on the bookshelf. Yeah, no, I started that book, but so that book is more connected to motherhood and the strength of motherhood.
It looks at the mother figure, the immaculate being of the mother and her strengths and her characteristics and her undying passions for her children, both adopted children and birth children as well.
Oh, I didn't know that
Yeah.
about the adopted children.
Yeah.
How she came to adopt children?
Well, it's not her adopting children. It's just looking at figures that function as mothers,
Oh,
and whether she takes children under her wing or they're biological children, but she looks at all of these different mother figures themselves.
oh.
I would just recommend checking it out. It is a brilliant, brilliant book that talks about this other perspective of strong women.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I hope to do a podcast episode about it, this concept of motherhood and kind of diversifying motherhood. So that's why I asked about
Hmm.
adopted children. It doesn't have to be a biological or even someone that you t care for on a day-to-day basis. This idea of opening up adoption through and mothering a society or something. I might get into that later, but I want to ask you in terms of motherhood, because you've written
Yes.
on this concept of feral mothers, right?
Yes, yes, I have.
Can you explain to us what that means and kind of what you wrote about or what you dive
Well,
into?
it's actually it's for a publication that's coming out this upcoming October. And excuse me, apologies. Let me just look that one up really quick. I have it written down here. It's called Horror and Motherhoods in Global Cultural Imaginaries. It's by Christina Santos, Rachel Davidson, and Sarah Avila Sanchez.
Okay.
I contributed a chapter to their book, and it talks about feral mothers. And I use a little bit of Dr. Estes's theory when it talks about the strength of mothers. However, I put a little bit of a Gothic spin on it. So I analyze these violent, strong, destructive mother figures in American dime novels. So basically the American Dime novel. It was America's equivalent to Penny Bloods or Penny Dreadfuls over in England. And what they did in the American Dime novels, they had a history of looking at indigenous peoples from America, from the United States, and transforming them into these witch-like or hag-like figures. So in each of these texts that I look at there's one of them is called The Black Death, and then the other one is called Gypsy Mag. And both of the women in there are depicted as feral and ferocious witch figures. However, they're just protective, strong mothers trying to protect their children from succumbing to all the atrocities of this new society.
Mm,
So that's where the chapter basically looks at. It talks about the I don't want to say the way the biologics kick in when you're a mother, but it was similar to that because I do talk about female biology, excuse me, in the text as well. But it's more like this instinctual protection that kicks in
mm,
that makes these women quote unquote Gothic figures.
mm. So it's
So.
almost it's a misinterpretation of actually it's this motherly protective instinct, kind of like the classic bear in the wilderness. If you get in between a mom and her cubs, then she might
Mhm.
attack you. Well, this is kind of the for black bears, right? So grizzly bears, you just stay
Yeah.
away. But the black bears is like if it's a mom and you're between the cub, then get away. And so is it this creative reappropriation of that instinctual um,
hmm
so how does that play into, because your work also kind of juxtaposes it to the domestic woman and how that arises in the Victorian era. Can you say more about that?
Oh, sure. It's an absolute juxtaposition to the Victorian woman, and I talk about that in my Monstrous Women book. And yes, I do a lot of more literary analyses on those texts. It's only recently that I've expanded more into like the full-on ecofeminist field where I'm looking at, nonfiction
Mhm,
instead of just fictional works. But if you look at, for example, in the Victorian period, I talk about the middle and upper class women of Victorian society,
mm,
where they're sheltered, they're incredibly domesticated, and they have these specific constructs that are created for them where they're mothers, they're birth givers, they take care of the household, and they only have specific things that they're I don't want to say they're allowed to do, but they're supposed to do. That's socially apt.
mhm,
And if they deviated at all from any one of those ideologies, they become the quintessential monstrous woman as you see in Gothic fiction. And that's why I went to Bertha Mason, for example. I need to keep going back to Jane Eyre, but she's like absolutely one of my favorite characters.
mm,
Bertha Mason, they depicted her as she wasn't domesticated. They depicted her as feral. She was over sexualized. She was the antithesis to Jane Eyre herself. But the funny part is, when you're looking at her as the so-called monstrous or wild woman, she's just a mirrored representation of Rochester himself.
mm,
So it was okay for the man to behave that way in Victorian, but not for the woman to act the exact same way. Um, and then in my studies, I also, like I said, I did a lot of psychological, biological, and neurological analyses to these as well, because I became very fascinated with what neurosciences of the 19th century,
Oh,
because there were a lot of experts, for
yeah.
the lack of a better term, that correlated sexual impulses of women, only women,
Mm,
to things like hysteria or a disruption to their neurological system. So I did incorporate that into a lot of my text as well.
my-
And these supposed women, like Bertha, like Catherine Earnshaw, Mrs. Lovett from Sweeney Todd or String of Pearls, for example, they were all seen as biologically and neurologically divergent because they didn't align with the construct of Victorian woman. So hence monstrous woman.
Wow. So
Yeah.
they tied it to biology back then.
Hmm.
And that kind of does that connect to this um women are naturally submissive, right? Because that
Yes.
was that the construction, the construction was when these early, and what period was this again?
This was the 19th century. So we're looking at the span of, I want to say the mid 1800s to the incredibly early 1900s. And that's right around the time it's the late 1850s when Darwin came around with his theories, but actually early on in, I believe it was 1840 or 1841, there was this neurobiologist named Dr. Thomas Laycock who kind of took the old philosophy that women's insanity or women's behavior is controlled by her uterus. He
Right.
kind of transmorphed that into no, 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 it's not the uterus. It's when the ovaries are aggravated or the ovaries are inflamed, they become feral. Women become slaves to their instincts, and thus the reason they break out of these social constructs. So what Thomas Laycock was trying to say, and this was prior to Darwin, is that women were slaves to their nature.
Mm,
And that's where my whole argument, my all of my research just found its center is that woman and nature relationship.
right. So is this just all to try to control women, or what would be the underlying drive to create these scientific experiments or call them truths, right? What do you take from that?
Well, I mean, it's all about the perspective of the person who's doing the research. And I can
Right.
only speak on my opinion or my evidence that I found is I found that there were a lot, especially during the Victorian time and later in the century, you had a lot of women stepping forward. They they had a voice now. Women
Right.
wanted to be heard, okay? I found that especially during this time that it was a method of control.
Mhm.
Um, Men did not appreciate women coming forward. They did not want them in the workplace. They did not want, especially middle and upper class women. I'm not focused on working class women per se, but you notice there is a big wave of middle and upper class women that were presented as lifelike dolls
Mm,
during that period that were really starting to come out and open their mouths. They were starting to write. They were starting to protest. So I really believe that it was just a society's form of silencing the woman or controlling the woman.
wow, it's like her emergent empowerment, and then it felt like a threat. And so
Mhm.
then we're using biology to kind of oh, it's your nature to not be that vocal or to be publicly to be an activist or to push
Yes,
back or to be anything other than existing in the domestic realm. So
absolutely.
can you say a little bit more about hysteria? Because I feel like that's such a huge trope to control women. It's just the classic example when, women aren't behaving, and then it's like, oh, they're being hysterical. But
Ugh.
I always, you even see it. I always talk about this in my classes with Hillary
Yes.
Clinton when she was running for president, and then they say lock her up. I was like, this is so kind of reinscribing that same witch trope or hysteria, right? And those are still kind of present in our bodies in a deep unconscious way. And so I just was like, oof, this is ugly. We're
Oh yeah.
going back to the, 18th century here, or
Uh,
probably older.
that if that is the one statement that just gets under my skin. If I ever hear the oh, don't worry about her, she's just being hysterical. Oh my God, that's that's one thing that just sets me off.
You're like,
And
let
no,
me
it doesn't make me hysterical. It just annoys me. Um,
do a very articulate response to it.
I just give people the look. Whenever I hear that, they just get the stone stare from me. I'm like, can we please use different terminology? Can we upgrade that? Um, but so yeah, what I had seen during my research, especially during that time period, it was if a woman was acting like a person. I mean, that's the best way I could describe it. I don't want to say, oh, not acting like herself, because really, what is herself?
Yeah.
If a woman, for example, someone like me, I am truly outspoken. I can be brash at times. I do stand up for myself. I cook, I clean, I take care of my household. I'm happily married. I love my husband. But if you try to slot me into the quote unquote kitchen space and tell me I'm supposed to have children and do this, I would probably be one of those women dubbed as a witch. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Me too.
So, so I can't say, oh, she was, acting unaccordingly, because every person is different.
Yeah.
Well, what had happened, they had these paper doll ideologies in the Victorian period.
Mm-hmm.
Men were supposed to be part of culture, women were supposed to be part of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And because women were supposed to be part of nature, and that means instincts, self-preservation, protection, everything else, we kind of have to give an outline of what her behaviors are supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you're starting to see conduct books by like Sarah Stickney Ellis, for example, or Isabella Beaton was another one. They would release conduct books about how women, how middle class and upper class women were supposed to behave, what they were supposed to do. So they were kind of given guides on how to be the socially perfect woman.
Mm.
Um, so anybody who deviated from that and just lived life how they wanted to live were deemed practically they were deemed as these bad individuals. They were kind of tossed aside and characterized as broken or classified as broken women.
Mm.
And for the women in the upper echelon, they didn't want to say, oh no, the aristocrats or the nobles are broken women. So we're going to say they're hysterical. We're going to put them in a facility and have them taken care of, all of those things, because they didn't want to admit that, oh, we didn't regulate our women properly.
Oh.
So I feel like that's a lot where this so-called hysteria really exploded during that time period.
So they would actually be institutionalized.
Not all of them. There were a lot of women that I had noticed that were, yes, there were lots of institutionalizations that occurred during the time, but there were a lot of upperclassmen that didn't want to institutionalize their women, and they would just keep them at home and have them provided with care because they were embarrassed about the behaviors of their women.
Wow. So they were socialized out of being human beings with
Yes.
biases and opinions,
Mhm.
and so kind of not beaten into subservience, but psychologically
Oh, yes.
enforced. This is how that behavior got
Yeah.
enforced. And so your work particularly looks at literature and how those were kind of socialization pieces.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
My
so,
primary chapter in that, my first chapter in that would talk all about the structure of the Victorian period and what the expectations were supposed to be. And then each chapter afterward talked about, and yes, it does get a little hyperbolic towards the end, because like I think the second chapter I look at the supposed hysterical woman in literature and the representation. And some of them are so over exaggerated, it's absolutely ridiculous. And then I look at the criminal woman, a woman who is so confined by the rules that she breaks out. She starts getting involved in all these criminal organizations.
oh,
And then, of course, I went the complete Gothic route at the end of my book. I chapter 4, I look at how women turn into werewolves at the end of the book.
oh, as we've been talking, I've been just floating around. Have you seen the film Night Bitch?
No, I've heard about it and it's on my to watch list.
I feel like, especially when now that you bring in the trope of women turning into werewolves when they connect to their instinctual power.
Yes.
So, ooh, let's go there in terms of instinctual power, because I think this is a thread in your work.
Hmm.
So okay, let me try to articulate this. So, in the Victorian era, in these kind of Gothic, in this literature to reinscribe this social behavior to domestic size women,
Hmm.
they're saying, and to use biology to reinforce that, they're kind of socializing women to say, this is your true nature, right? Subservient, docile. But then you and I have spoken briefly about Stacey Alimo's work, and this is
Hmm.
definitely the work that I'm doing when I bring women out into nature, that it's almost this creative reappropriation of actually you go out into nature and experience nature for yourself. This is actually a space of empowerment that is tied to instincts because it's you experiencing you in a deeper way where you get away from all of these the media, those the weird things people say to reinscribe these domestic dimensions of femininity, right? It's you and wild nature. And so it's I always find it's this paradox, right? That historically women have been said, this is your nature, right? Domesticity, and then go into the wild, and it's like, well, we don't want to um, reappropriate or reinscribe old narratives that are no longer serve us. So where's that kind of middle ground, or do you want to say something about Stacey Alimo's work as the outdoors as a place of empowerment for women?
Oh yeah. Well that's one of the reasons I was so drawn to her work. Is during all of my research, I've read the whole dualist perspective where there was that conflict of originally women in nature were seen as a negative concept. I believe Carolyn Merchant talks about it, Sherry Ortner talks about it, and it's this connection of women in nature is seen as detrimental to the woman herself, and the whole ideology or the whole idea, the concept of woman in nature should be removed from one another. That relationships should be separated.
Mm.
But then you come across Stacy's work, and she talks about we don't need to separate woman from nature. We need to change the language.
Oh.
We can keep the relationship. Woman is connected to nature, but how about we look at that space, that natural space, as undomesticated? And
Mm,
through that undomesticated or untamed space, you can use that as a space of power.
mm,
And that's why, and that's why I kind of used her logic in the chapter about the werewolves or the she-wolves. It's like I kind of took my argument and I expanded on it using that Gothic spin that woman's transgression from being domestic to wild comes out in those undomesticated spaces. So hence I had the transformation into the she-wolves. It was woman's acceptance to being part of nature, and then she was using it as a place of strength and power. It's where she regained her agency.
mm, mhm,
So whereas men at the time were saying woman plus nature equals domestic or a bad thing, women were saying, you know what? Women in nature, that's a good thing. I'm using that to be a powerful force.
okay, okay. And so you're saying that this she will figure represents that empowerment force of
Yes.
women connecting to nature is
Their
empowerment.
reclamation of agency, their acceptance that they, hey, you know what? I am part of nature and I'm going to use that to my advantage.
Right. Which is actually kind of a scary space to go back into because if historically women were connected to instincts, right, in nature, and that was a way to keep them down, then going into nature and connecting with one's instincts. But I guess that's where the empowerment goes, is
Mhm.
it feels scary, but then the agency arrives. Like you get to choose what this means to you, or you reclaiming this space for yourself.
Exactly. And that's the whole argument that has been time and time again. It's that whole essentialist or reductionist
Right.
perspective of creating that language where, okay, women are affiliated with nature. And what does that mean? Okay, you're slaves to your instinct. You're slaves to your reproductive system. So if you're connected to nature, that means that you're there for procreation. There's that reductionism.
Mm,
And that's what society and what culture was saying in the 19th century, that women were there for procreation and procreation alone. Sit there, be quiet, have children, take care of your household and your family.
yeah.
Women later on started recognizing, they're like, okay, this is what I'm being told. Well, it's the language that needs to shift into change. So let's change the definition of what the relationship of woman and nature actually is. It no longer means being a slave to my reproductive system. It means that, you know what? I have a choice. If
Mm,
I want to be have that reproductive system as part of my life, if I want to give into my instincts, whatever the case may be, it's my choice, it's my decision. And that's where you start seeing that agency come through is with the language shift. And
mm.
that's a lot of what Stacey Alimos is talking about in her book. It's just shifting that the meaning of things.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So focusing on choice and agency
Mhm.
and shifting the language. So you said something in your article on the Wild Witch of the Heath, and you were focusing on Lamarck, and he
Mhm.
says that if women are exposed to their nature, it would lead to a regenerative state.
Yes. Yes.
What is that or
Ah,
regenerative state? Did I get that right?
yes, yes,
Positive.
yes. So, Lamarck, he just had, I'm trying to think of the exact way to describe Lamarck because I don't want to say he was I use the term expert loosely in his field, but I don't want to sit there and give him a multitude of positive credit because I kind of feel like he was more of a pseudoscientist than an actual expert.
Okay.
Um, so basically what he was talking about in his studies is, like I said, he focused on a lot on the neurobiology of hysteria. And what he was basically talking about, and he emphasized this quite a lot, is that women's instincts basically he was talking about women's arousal and behavior. That was their instincts. That's what he focused on. So he was talking about mostly that if a woman was left to her own accord and she wasn't monitored, she would essentially what's the word I'm looking for? Interfere with her own arousals. And she would get to a point that she was so aroused by either exercise or specific foods or
Huh.
interactions that if left to her own accords, it would become problematic,
Huh.
that she would become promiscuous and it would be driven by her instinctual side. She would be uncontrollable at that point.
Okay.
So he's talking about the regenerative nixus because he said basically she would get stuck in a feedback loop. So if this started occurring to her biological system, it would impact her neurological system, thereby creating this new what they call the dynamic core process. And she would it's a whole neurological thing where they talk about the global mapping system. She would hardwire into her brain that she would just get in this cycle and then she would just become promiscuous and then that's it. She
Huh.
would never be able to get out of it.
So it's almost like they were afraid of the, I'm going to use the autopoetic dimension of wildness in and of itself, right? The
Oh yes.
self-generative. So that's what they were actually afraid
Yes.
of.
That he mentioned it so many times. This was like a 450 page text that specifically talks about that whole generative process and how it just keeps replicating itself in the neurons and creating all of these new pathways within a woman's mind. And because of this, she would be unable to be quote unquote retrained. So, yeah.
Oh, okay, okay.
Uh, Now you could see why I read a lot of his work. It was interesting and revolting all at the same time.
Oh my gosh, there's so much there.
Hmm.
Untrained.
And trains.
Yeah, but that's the place of empowerment, which because the agency, the
Hmm.
regeneration of nature, and women seeing that in themselves when they go in nature. But of course, that would be a huge fear to patriarchal systems that,
Yes.
need to control women's instinctual nature
Hmm.
to use a Marxist kind of analogy, to use our labor and our love and, the reproductive nature of us to uphold society in this
Yes.
patriarchal way. So, but that's
Yeah.
going back to the empowerment. I think that's where that is. But you're also helping me answer a question that I've been sitting with for a while, which is why is there this fear of women's sexuality and controlling sexuality and how that's connected to the witch figure. Do you have
Yeah.
a little
Uh,
about
I
that?
have yet to come up with an
Yeah.
answer definitively on that. That is one of those rabbit holes that when you fall down, you're not coming out for a
No.
while.
That's so true. It's so much there.
I am still I am currently working on that new project, the Ecofeminist Handbook
Mhm.
at the moment. And when I'm completed with that, I actually have a new project in line where I'm continuing to look at the neurology of the behavior of these supposed wild women and what the detriment actually is and why do we need to control
Yeah.
women's reproductivity. So I
Yeah.
do have this whole project outlined. It's just finding the time to actually sit there and do the work on it.
Tell me about it.
So,
No, that's amazing. I'm so excited that you're doing this. So, first of all, tell the audience about your current project, and then we can get in a little bit about. I have a question about the neurology of the second
okay.
project. But yeah, tell me.
Well, well, the current project, and it's grown since you and I had last communicated.
Oh, wow.
We are now up to 80 contributors, so we're looking at 80 chapters. It's called the Handbook of Ecofeminism, and I'm working on that currently with a co-editor, Doug Vakash. It started off as several years ago, we wanted to publish something. It was going to be 50 contributors or 50 chapters for Francois Diobon's anniversary for
Yeah.
the 50 years for ecofeminism. Well, since that time, it has now expanded into a global handbook. Um,
Um,
so we are in the midst of gathering all materials right now. We are hoping to have I want to say the first portfolio sent to the publisher within the next several weeks.
oh, nice.
So I'm hoping that it'll be on the shelves by next year.
Oh, perfect. So everybody can
So
look for it in 2027, hopefully.
hopefully it's slow going. It's a lot working with 80 contributors.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Herding cats
So
sometimes.
so there's a lot of editing, a lot of revising, a lot to read. I
Yeah.
have to invest in a pair of reading glasses soon, I think.
Oh, geez. Yeah, it's a labor of love for sure.
It
For
is.
sure. We
It's
appreciate you.
very exciting.
It is. It's great to see this much excitement around the topic of ecofeminism because I think
Yes.
it's really relevant. And kind of moving into your next project, I feel like we're just scratching the surface because we haven't even talked about the Malleus Maleficarum. And, this is so we're talking about just the kind of theory behind um, controlling women's nature and sexuality, but then it gets institutionalized
Mhm.
by the Roman Catholic Church through this Malleus Maleficarum, and so then it gets reinscribed in um, Christian theology, and
Yes.
and so this is that trickle down effect of how it becomes socialized and normalized.
Hmm.
Um, but to go back to we were talking about the self-regenerative dimension of women and nature. As you were talking, it just to me feels like women's like n I don't want to call it natural mysticism, but it feels um like a mystical engagement with nature. I don't know, something about as you were describing, um, and to have men sexualize it is kind of interesting. But there is a little bit in in witch studies or witchy practices where even just feeling your skin against the wind, if you actually tune into it, there is an orgasmic sense to
Hmm.
it, right? That our skin is an organ to be receptive to the natural world. So I don't know, maybe there's some fear about that. Well,
Well, there,
I'll have to have you back on the podcast either while you're working on your next project or
sure.
after it's done.
Yeah, when I get more into the midst of things, because yeah, I am looking at the Malleus. That is a text I'm very familiar with.
Oh,
Because it was during my graduate studies, I was going for my master's degree. I was doing a lot of work on the Salem witch trials. So I've been out to Salem every year since 2015, I want to say. So every year I go out there. Every year I go to the archives. I do a deep dive into the archives, and that's where I get a lot of my information. And that's what drove my passion for looking at witches. So
wow.
and I attribute this to I had a professor in my master's degree who introduced me to this. She became my friend. Her name's Dr. Michelle Tarter, and I give her complete accolades for pointing me in the direction of the witches
No kidding. So you go, it's like a pilgrim. You go there every year.
every year. So I'm actually going in 12 days for
Oh
my
my gosh.
next trip. Yeah.
So what's on the agenda when you go there?
Well, I'm going to the American Gothic Society conference that they have out at the Hawthorne every 2 years.
Wow.
It's called the Return to Salem.
Oh,
I'm presenting there, and then for the remainder of the time, I'm going to enjoy the conference and then wander around my local haunts and see what trouble I can get into.
yay, good trouble. I love it. Or bad trouble.
Oh, it's good trouble.
Oh, so uh, I want to hear a little bit more about your discoveries going into the archives.
There was when I first went, I absolutely love the archives. If we were allowed to, I would spend most of my time down there. I actually bought there was a book by Bernard Rosenthal. It is an incredibly thick text, and it's a lot of it is just photocopies or transcriptions of the actual court documents from the Salem witch trials.
Oh my gosh.
Absolutely love it. It's basically my Bible.
Wow.
When I went there, I read a lot about Bridget Bishop. She was one
Okay.
of the first women that were
Okay.
hanged during this time period. And for some reason, just reading about her trial, reading her pleas to the court, it just, I felt like this deep connection to this woman. People tried painting her as the wild woman of Salem, but if you do the archival research, and you'll find that the people that are claiming this are incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
If you read a lot of literature about Bridget Bishop, a lot of these texts will say, oh, she was this flamboyant tavern keeper who ran around in this red bodice, cursing men. She was loud, she was vociferous. But if you go and you actually read the stories about her, if you read the court documents, if you read the words that come out of her mouth, they're nothing like, she's nothing like she was presented in modern literature or contemporary literature. So it's once again people creating these stereotypes about these victimized women.
Mm-hmm.
So and again, because of all of this, I feel like a lot of my work centers on the Bridget Bishop character or the figure herself.
So in what way was Bridget Bishop victimized?
Well, like I said, I don't, we're still trying to determine why she was persecuted, why she was seen as a quote unquote witch.
Okay.
It could be just as simple as she said the wrong words to somebody, or
Right.
it could be just that she had money.
Right.
And
Yeah.
she was victimized because they claim that she was a witch. They claim that she was promiscuous. These men came forward in the court documentations that they dreamt about her, that she came into their room in the middle of the night and did these things. These are what they're dreaming about. So why was she turned into a villain for somebody's dream? It's
Oh,
all
wow.
because she didn't align with society's constructs.
Right. So there's almost two things going on here. Number one, if you take like a Jungian approach, we didn't have psychology we as a field of study, so we didn't know that a dream was you
Hmm.
thinking about someone else. So maybe it was because she was actually attractive or sexual, or there's something about her
Hmm.
that got to men, and then they were like, "Oh, this is a dangerous woman," which has nothing to do with what she's doing. It's her being, which
Right.
therefore gets the victimization point. And then the second thing that's going on here is, and I've heard this. Have you read Sylvia Federici's work on oh, what's it called?
Caliban and the Witch.
Yes, but
Yes.
yeah, I haven't read that one, but her second one, what's it called? I'll have to put it in the show notes afterwards. But she's once again taking a Marxist approach, saying, "Oh, actually, there's a lot of kind of the rise of capitalism and use through patriarchal capitalism that women who had property and money and power were seen as threats. And so, if you call them witches, get rid of them, then you get their property, then you get their money. So
Yeah.
it almost seems like she had that double whammy against her because of her
Yes.
power.
Yeah, because yeah, it was your estate and everything else was just absorbed by the community. So
Uh,
other people benefited from her death. So yeah,
wow. Okay. So yeah. So this is the powerful women, the dangerous women. Very cool. Well, I have had such a good time talking to you.
yeah, me too.
I feel like we have just scratched the surface. I actually really want to go to, I actually haven't been to Salem and I'd love to dig into the archives. I'm jealous that you're
You
going.
you should at least try to visit it once in your life. It is, yes, there's the touristy side of Salem, don't get me wrong. There
Yeah,
is that quintessential area, but once you get into the archives, it's a feeling that I will never forget.
I believe it. Yeah. And so to get into the archives, do you have to present anything, you know?
They like to see, you have to contact, I think they changed it. You used to be the Peabody Essex, and then I think they changed it to the Danvers library. You have to contact them. They like to see credentials to see
Credentials.
if you have
Okay.
an affiliate with the university,
Got it.
just to make sure you're not going to go in there and cause trouble.
Yeah, that's kind of why I asked because,
Hmm.
it could easily be a place that someone goes to cause
Yeah.
trouble. So,
And
okay.
it's the texts are so delicate. You are allowed to, they do have like sleeving and stuff. You are allowed to interact with the texts and actually read them. It's an experience. I don't want to ruin it for you.
Okay, I want. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, well, before I let you go, is there any last words or anything that we didn't cover that you kind of want to get into in terms of the wild women archetype or women in nature, your work in
No,
nature?
it's just um the only thing I really have to say is again, like you had said before, it's I am so happy that ecofeminism is making waves. I'm so happy that it's starting to become prolific again. I know there's consistent waves
Yes.
since, the 1970s since it emerged. But I really feel, especially with what's going on in the world, things are becoming cyclical.
Mm,
Um, I just want people to be aware, to, look at things through an eco-feminist lens. Don't, focus on these potential stereotypes of women. Don't essentialize or reduce people to their biologies again.
mm.
Um, Wild women are wild women for a reason, and it's not just because, oh, we're bad people.
Yeah, and wild gender too.
Yes.
I appreciate you bringing up the cyclical nature of this because I feel like when I started getting into ecofeminism and really connecting to it as a philosophy and a historical analysis and the work of Carolyn Merchant and Val
Mm,
Plumwood, I got pushback from my higher ups because they're saying, or when I would present it at conferences and people would say, "Isn't that essentialist? Haven't we moved past that?" And so I felt like I had to just keep kind of defending my position and try to explain what I saw because of
hmm.
what you're getting at. These, well, we don't want to reinscribe the essentialism. We're beyond essentialism. And so I think I appreciate you bringing up the cyclical nature and how it is kind of making a comeback. And
It
so
is.
I'm excited to ride that wave, and which is really a familiar metaphor for the feminist movement, right? That moves in
Mhm.
waves as well. We're in the fourth wave, and it'll probably,
Keep going, hopefully.
yeah, hopefully. All right, awesome. Well, thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Kim. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone. This podcast has been brought to you in collaboration with the Luce Foundation, the American Academy of Religion, and the Wild Women nonprofit. Thanks so much for joining us. Please follow us so you can keep returning to the fire. And in the meantime, be wild and be well.